Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the folks at Amazon Music for partnering with us on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. But more on this later. Right then, let's get right into today's episode. He's done it, ladies and gentlemen. Lando Norris is a race winner at last. And you can tell by the happiness in all of our voices that this is something we've been waiting for such a long time. It's such a moment that we knew would be coming in. And I will admit, on the Inside Line F1 podcast, we did call him to be somewhat of a driver who doesn't quite does the best of his abilities in the key moments. I raised my hand and say I was the one who doubted him the most among all three of us, but he's proven me wrong, and I'm so glad he has. Which is where it's also confusing, Kunal, because when you see a driver finally reach that glorious moment of winning a Grand Prix for the first time, and by the way, this is something we've been waiting for so desperately since Sochi 21, it's sort of confusing that the narrative around it for so many people is not that, hey, our favorite driver has won. Partially in India, it's also that, hey, why did he win on the day I slept? But the other thing is he just lucky to win? And that question confuses me, baffles me, annoys me slightly. What do you make of that question completely?
Well, I think he was lucky to win, but he had devastating pace to make the most of that luck. That's the main part, right? It's like this. If he didn't have the pace, he would have still, the way the cards played out of the safety car, he would have still come out ahead of Max Verstappen. But the fact that he could keep Max Verstappen at bay right from maybe half a lap after the restart was purely down to the pace of that McLaren. And the pace of that McLaren on the soft, not on the soft, because on the soft is where they were completely all over the place, right? On the medium and the hard was what was so interesting this weekend in Miami. And they brought, a fresh set of upgrades. Norris had the full upgrades. Piastri had only half of them. But interestingly, if you remember just the last race in China, Somil, the McLarens were going quicker when it was cooler in China. In Miami, it was actually really, really hot and they were still quick. I really hope this is giving us a lot of hope as the season progresses. We still have, 18 odd Grand Prix and 4 sprints remaining or 3 sprints remaining. I don't know, something.
Hey, you're counting them now, which is an improvement. Earlier, you didn't even used to count them. So are we seeing a bit of a move towards the pro sprint side, Kunal? Come on. I mean, all the last few good races that we've had, be it China, be it this one, be it... Oh, well, what other sprint races we had? Man, goodness, but...
We've had 2 this year, I guess, didn't we? China.
Yeah, but both of them were quite good. Yeah. I mean, and both of those times we saw Max making a driver error, which is something we rarely ever do in a non-sprint weekend. I mean, come to think about it, what was the last Max error in a non-sprint weekend where he just didn't have enough time to understand the car? I can't think of one.
I just know his spin in Hungary in 22, where he was leading. He spun, did a 360, checked everyone around, still resumed as the leader, and still went on to win the race. Right, that's all I remember. But yeah, the sprint weekend was not too bad. It's a lot of data. I mean, imagine this. I mean, we record a preview, and then we wait till all the sessions are done to do a review, and then suddenly you write down all the points. And you're like, wow, this is what happened on Friday. This is what happened on Saturday. This is what happened on Sunday, because everything is absolutely still valid, right? The whole weekend is what we try and capture in the post-race review episode, right? So the sprint is good. I mean, I also probably feel very relaxed on the Monday after the race, which is why I'm feeling that it's good. Had you asked me yesterday, my notes and my placards when I was in the Viaplay studio were so many, because there's just so many data points, so many stories, so many narratives to track through the weekend.
Seriously. And okay, wait. I am normally at this junction inclined towards talking about the race winner, which we should do in good depth because it's such an important moment given the context of it all. But at last, I'm so glad, Kunal, we got to see Haas making it a proper home race. I mean, all of their drivers that has to be the battle of the weekend for me. Like just Haas versus the boundaries of what's sportsmanlike or what's unsportsmanlike. So many penalties to Kevin Magnussen. I believe it's somewhat on the borderline of being unsportsmanlike. I feel that's pushing the line a bit too far and just basically leaving everyone else with no choice. But you have a different opinion on that.
Firstly, we have to go back and talk about Lando Norris because that win deserves much talk, right? Typically, it's Max winning.
Sure.
We're doing what Bernd Mylander did. He just thought Max is a race leader. Let me just go catch him. And, we're like, yeah, it's again another race that Max has won. Let's not talk about the race winner. No, guys and girls, we will talk of Lando Norris winning. And another interesting Max Verstappen winning thing, Jean-Pierre Lambies, or GP as we know, Max's race engineer, after the race ended, had to remind him, Max, it's not the central board, which means it's not the P1 board you're going to go stop at, right? However, going back to your question, which was about Haas. Haas is, two very interesting points here. Firstly, Haas was battling Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton at their home race. If I was the sponsorship director of Haas, which I could have probably had the opportunity to win had I applied, I guess, I would have gone on the Monday and said, guess what? We are battling former world champions, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. Because Kevin Magnussen versus Lewis Hamilton in the sprint was incredible. Okay. As was Nico Hulkenberg versus Lewis Hamilton. Another very incredible battle. And, as for Magnussen, unsportsmanlike, I believe, firstly, we make it very difficult for drivers to overtake on track, right? We make it very difficult. What do? Give them tires which overheat, cars which don't behave well in dirty air, tracks which are just have one or two overtaking spots, so to say. And then you have this wretched DRS, which means it's pretty much the right of the driver who's following you to overtake you. It's like, yeah, you're entitled. You're within 1 second. Just flick this wing and you'll go through, right? And then teams, of course, want their drivers to hold position. So I'm in this space where we make it so tough. And by the way, I shouldn't forget, fans want overtaking as well. So everybody wants overtaking, but the driver who is being overtaken, obviously, right? And I think Kevin Magnussen did what we would have loved to see in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, absolute wheel-to-wheel battles. Yeah, that one, error where, not error, but, actually, why don't we just call it a driving error, right? One error on the inside, he brake laid, ran out of grip, ran out of road, ran off track, did that same thing to Lewis Hamilton. But hey, that's what he did. He wanted to keep track position. I don't think it was unsportsmanlike. And I'll put it this way. We had Carlos Sainz versus Oscar Piastri in the Grand Prix. I bet you Andrea Stella, right, who actually called Kevin Magnussen unsportsmanlike. He would have hoped that Oscar Piastri could have done what Kevin Magnussen had done just to keep drivers at bay. Sportsman or unsportsmanlike doesn't matter. Just keep that position.
So are you saying, Mikey, we went motor racing? No, Toto, we went motor racing?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so if you're going back to Abu Dhabi 2021, oh, definitely, that was the wrong call that was made at that time.
No, not that way, but just the line, Toto, we went motor racing, unsportsmanlike.
I would say so. I would say so, and I'll actually add context. Okay, anyone thinking I'm crazy and, I'm talking bullshit, an answer which wasn't aired, but is actually on the FIA website in text. Max Verstappen was asked after the sprint race. Very simple question. Max, what's it with the tires that you're unable to overtake or able to push, etc.? And Max literally looked and actually, it's not just the tires. It's everything. It's the circuits. It's the cars. It's the tires. It's everything that comes. He even, of course, blamed the temperature. But you can't do anything with the temperature, right? But he went on to solve it. He actually blamed every Formula or Formula One, where racing is becoming so difficult. Racing against each other is becoming so difficult.
Which is where, in some part, you can look at Lando Norris's performance and be like, okay, it was greatly assisted by the temperatures not being ideal, by the track being basically a lot like the 2020 Ferrari, where nobody could understand the conditions and the tires well enough. And as a result, it was easier to have track position. But regardless, lucky or not lucky, whatever it might be, I mean, let's look at it this way. A lot of people before Alfred Newton had apples fall on their head. It's just that he made the most of it and invented a law, the result of which is the fact that we end up going racing these days. Physics, it's incredible. But that's the whole scenario. Norris can't be blamed for being the one who was handed that position. At last, in fact, Kunal, we've seen him grab the opportunity in this case and make the most of it. And I know that I have often criticized his inability to do so in scenarios like a key qualifying session, like Qatar comes to mind, that qualifying and that sprint, like Brazil last year as well. China was a bit of a bummer with the race start and the qualifying and the lap almost being deleted. But nonetheless, do you feel he's got it, Lando Norris?
He's most definitely got it. Just the way I never imagined you'd use Isaac Newton and the falling apple.
I said Alfred Newton. Oh, who is Alfred Newton? Look at me being the stupid one here.
You need to sleep.
Oh, goodness.
You were up till the wee hours for the Miami Grand Prix. You need to get some sleep after this. No, Sir Isaac Newton, if we were to stick to the nomenclature. Apple falling, gravity was discovered at that time, right? But to put it this way, of course, Lando Norris has it. There's no doubt, which is why McLaren has been backing him, which is why Red Bull wanted him, which is why McLaren has, pinned him down for the long term as well. We have to remember, these drivers eventually need the machinery to make sure that they get all the results that they talk of. And forget you, it was Lando Norris yesterday who actually accepted all the mistakes he's made in the last 5 years till he got to his Grand Prix win. And, everyone's talking about the 110 races he's taken to win. His father said that he's been to almost 900 races with Lando to see him finally win a Formula One Grand Prix.
That's a lot. That's seriously some commitment. Financially, mentally, emotionally. Wow, that's something.
He even said 350 race weekends. Can you imagine? Wow.
All of that for this. Can you imagine how sweet it must feel? But it creates a question in my head. It's something that I can't answer myself, which is why I put it to you. But do you think Lando needed this more, or did McLaren need this more? Like, is it a vindication for the team more than it is for the driver?
I would say it was needed equally by both. It was McLaren's second win in 12 years, right? The last win, which was with Daniel Ricciardo, also happened when Max and Lewis were out of the race, right? This win was an absolute merit. Okay, they've been working towards this. In fact, Saumil, leading up to Miami, McLaren said, we're bringing these upgrades, we're chipping away at it. We should be able to challenge Red Bull in 12 months. They actually quantified it as 12 months. And guess what? They did it literally a few days later, right? And the Red Bull is still the stronger car, I would say, because if we were to look at it this way, with DRS, the McLaren, so even with all the upgrades, the weakness is still the DRS, right? With the DRS on, the McLaren was just about reaching the same top line speeds as Red Bull was doing without it, right? And to me, the best stat of the weekend, Saumil, is that McLaren, a customer of the Mercedes, Formula One team, a customer of the power units made by Mercedes, has won a race in 2024 before Mercedes themselves.
That's a dagger to their heart, huh? You're making them pay for all of this. Come on, I mean, let's not take them down as much on a weekend where they've already had that terrible of a showing. And it just gets worse because you realize after a point that they were not just usurped by McLaren, but also Daniel Ricciardo in P4 in qualifying and the sprint. So now they're getting beaten by people who are not even in the same category as them, believe it or not. I mean, that for me has to be one of the most entertaining stories of the entire weekend. And that is quite something, right? Seeing Daniel Ricciardo come back. And I know at the end of it won't sound as sweet as Lando Norris because obviously Lando's gotten his first big win and it's the main event, right? So that's what gets most attention. But had it not been for just a weird qualifying session, which happened to most drivers this weekend, at least one of their qualifying sessions went a little bit haywire, Ricciardo could have been one of the biggest stories. And we shouldn't let it slide out underneath that he actually did a very, very good job as his teammate, in fact.
He did, and double points for Yuki Tsunoda, lots of points even for Alpha Tauri, or Racing Bulls as they're called. They have now overtaken Haas for, I think, sixth place in the Constructors' Championship, which I think is pretty phenomenal as well, right? In the case of Ricciardo, yes, the sprint is great. The whole consistency or inconsistency is what people are, of course, going to keep pointing out at each time. If Yuki's consistently bringing him on the points, whereas Ricciardo's getting one of those spikes and then plateauing, and the spikes and plateau. And for a midfield driver, and this is something actually said on Viaplay yesterday, for a midfield driver, you want the consistency, and it's a consistency why Nico Hülkenberg has been delivering for Haas and is Audi's choice from next year itself, right? But this is not about Nico. Talking still about Racing Bulls, I think, incredible stuff by Yuki Tsunoda. He said Honda is supporting him to get a seat in 2026, but that means there has to be an opening at Aston Martin. And Honda, of course, has said that there could be a chance at Aston Martin in 26, which makes me wonder, do they know something about Lance Stroll that we all don't know?
No, I know it very, very clearly. Now Aston Martin have a reason to sack Fernando Alonso because Lance Stroll has finally beaten the world champion in qualifying. Hey!
Can you imagine?
No, nobody? No applause?
But
All of you listeners, come on, man.
I'll tell you one applause-worthy statement or fact here. Lance was on older tires in qualifying than Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso bolted a fresh set. I think it was a fresh set of softs or mediums. I can't remember. But Lance Stroll was on an older set and he still managed to out-qualify Fernando Alonso. So applause for Lance Stroll.
No, fair play. Genuinely fair play. I mean, I know a lot of it has to do more with the fact that Fernando Alonso had a poor qualifying than Lance Stroll having an incredible one. Because let's not forget the Aston Martins didn't make it to Q3, which is ultimately what their benchmark is. But again, he's got the number, he's got the record, and the history books will always say that he did out-qualify Fernando Alonso once. So that is quite something. But it makes me now think about this whole big question, right? And I spent a lot of time this Monday just wondering, what was the best battle of the weekend? Because for me, I'm mentally confused between three of them. Firstly, it was, as I mentioned earlier, Haas versus the borderline of what's sportsmanlike versus what's not sportsmanlike. The second one being the F1 admin versus Lando Norris's privacy, because they literally recorded him speaking to his family. I mean, come on, let the man speak to his family in peace. Don't record that stuff. Or the third one is Alonso versus Ben Sulayem. And I am confused because according to the order of the weekend, that happened earliest, which is why it's not getting as much traction. But that in itself is such a statement that he didn't get a penalty, because, or rather, Lewis Hamilton didn't get a penalty because he is in Spanish. And to double down upon that, Sergio Perez also didn't get a penalty, which is basically, I'm assuming, the FIA's retort saying that it's not just the Brits, even the Mexicans are a part of that same whole bias. No, consistency, I mean, we're seeing the FIA get there. Right?
Let me add to it, because Carlos Sainz got a penalty for that wheel-to-wheel battle against Oscar Piastri, right?
Well,
but I have to put it here, and Carlos Sainz being Spanish, of course, but Lewis Hamilton not picking up a penalty for that opening lap, mishap or whatever you call it, is a bit strange, because he took out Lando Norris, he took out Lance Stroll and Aston Martin. I mean, literally damaged their races, and they just treated it as a test session, much like Fernando would keep joking all the time. Checo Perez not picking up a penalty is fine because he actually didn't hit anyone or damage anyone's race prospects per se. He literally found a gap and went for it, and everybody else avoided him. Yes, he messed up the race order a bit, but that's okay. He didn't really, mess up somebody's car, didn't damage anyone's car. And as for Carlos Sainz, again, the cars are so difficult to overtake that somebody has to elbow out and nudge someone and, trip over somebody's toes or get somebody to trip over your toes. That's what happened. And I somewhat think Carlos's penalty still makes sense because Oscar's car was absolutely demolished. They had to go. He was overtaking, 3 cars in a span of one lap or something. But Samuel, the race in Miami was actually a race of two halves because the race was literally split by the safety car. Before the safety car, Max Verstappen would have won comfortably and Oscar Piastri would have finished second, I believe, because Oscar was, also really quick up front after he overtook, I think, Charles Leclerc at the first start, right? And the second half is what, of course, what mattered because that's the half that has the checkered flag. And that's where I think Lando Norris was clearly the best of anybody out there. And when was Max's mistake, though? Because he hit that bollard, which which nicely showed us the way air flows over an Adrian Newey designed car, right? And Max's mistake, since we already spoke of it, was actually because I think Leclerc was quicker and Max had the threat of the undercut looming over him. So Max went in too hot. Anyway, these cars don't like the slow speed section. And then boom, went the bollard.
Yeah. It's strange. Really strange. I think we've broken a streak here with this. We've broken a streak of Max making a driving error in the race. We've broken Max's incredible race winning streak. I've lost count about how many races it's been. We've broken a streak of Lando Norris being the driver with the most podiums without a win. Check out. Stroll out qualifying Alonso. And also Pierre Gasly out qualifying Esteban Ocon, which happened indeed in the race this time out. But of course, the biggest streak that's being created nowadays is Magnussen building a streak of getting penalty points. He's on the cusp of it all. 11, is it not?
Is it 8 or is it 11? I can't remember.
11?
But yeah, he's the closest to...
Far too many.
Yeah. He took Checo Perez too seriously while coming into the race weekend because the F1 drivers were asked in the official press conference saying, how's the penalty point system and do we need to revisit it? And Checo laughed and said, I think I'm leading the penalty points championship or something, right? And guess what? It's Kevin Magnussen who's leading the championship with regards to penalty points, I believe. But
close fighting.
Haas has probably realized if anyway we're going to get rid of Kevin, let him just pick up all the penalty points while he helps Nico pick up all the championship points, probably. Because that's what he did in Jeddah as well.
Yeah, exactly. Ditto. But we need to talk about Alpine as well, no, Kunal?
Yes.
Because we've slandered them a lot. Not that we still understand everything we do, because they have now hired an executive technical director, which means they have 4 technical directors now, if I'm not mistaken. Executive technical director and 3 technical directors for 3 different components of the car, which means essentially it's just the head of a particular department. Why do you call it a technical director? But the point being, whatever it is, it's helping because the more people they're adding to their management group, the more weight they're shedding down from their car, and it's working. These upgrades have eventually produced quite something. And I know David Coulthard was very aggressive about his comments about Alpine, which I find quite funny on the entire weekend. But this was good. I mean, good to see them rubbing shoulders and wheels with Aston Martin. And in the race space as well, being up there, keeping up in that upper midfield. It's genuine progress.
Yeah, I mean, they got both the cars into Q2, which also is progress. They scored a point, which I think is pretty fantastic. Again, on merit with everything that they had. 8th team to score points in this season already within just the first 6 races. So Williams and Sauber are the 2 ones that haven't scored a point. And their upgrades were largely, so they had upgrades on both the cars this race weekend, which I think is also good because it gave them more time to sort of understand and extract performance. But their upgrades were largely towards saving weight and getting them closer to the weight limit of these really heavy cars, right? And that's what sort of brought them lap time because you're just carrying around less weight on a car which they already know is got an engine deficit.
Wait, but my question here is how can a Formula One car be overweight within a year when obviously teams are trying their best to shed it? Is it just that the bar for being overweight has gone down? And to the point that the teams have cut down on so much weight in the last couple of years that what was acceptable in 2023 is not acceptable in 2024?
So one of the reasons why they end up being overweight is the composites that they use. You just have heavier ones that have been used. Could be cost reasons, could be manufacturing, sourcing reasons as well, right? And then it just helps, you just design the same part with a lighter, stronger, rigid component, which of course clears all the FIA tests. So then you just end up saving weight. And being at the weight limit or lower helps because then you can adjust your ballast in the car to help get more driving characteristics out for yourself. So you can put it at the front if you want more front end, etc. So I'm not going to get too technical because that's also not, I mean, I've driven and I understand how these things work, but I'm unable to explain it with as much technical clarity as some of the other technical people can, I would say.
And we'll bring them on. We'll bring them on the show to talk more about it. We definitely will. I mean, we've been trying to get so many incredible guests like Alex Jakes, the voice of F1 TV, who had such a brilliant commentary call, by the way, for Lando Norris winning. It was amazing. And if you want to hear more of his stories and his take on Formula One, you can definitely check out our Alex Jakes special, which was the last one coming before this episode. And also Christian Danner, one of the most legendary F1 commentators from Germany, who also is a driver who has done everything in the world of racing, including Formula One and TTM and sports cars and the likes. His episode is also going to be coming out very, very shortly. One thing before we end, though, the unluckiest driver of the weekend, you know I'll be talking about him, Carlos Sainz, and his interview after the race is what I find particularly interesting. Because normally most people were complaining about the tires or the grip or the safety car not helping them out. Carlos Sainz said, had the safety car come in a couple of laps ago, I would have been the race winner. Do you buy that statement? Because I do. His pace was looking faster than that of Piastri and Leclerc ahead of him. His composure at the start was amazing. He's always been a driver who's managed to hold on to pressure quite well. And had it been a couple of laps earlier, Sainz would have been the one cycling out first. I really do feel they've just lost one minorly.
I would say he would have probably definitely been on the podium for sure, given how the safety car literally, swung the fortunes around for some and then swung it back for the others and so on, right? But I don't believe the Ferrari had the pace to win. I think McLaren just had the pace to, extract all the performance they could have. Norris was, of course, nice in his composure to say he would have had to overtake both the Ferraris and the Max to claim the race win had he not had the safety car, etc. Right? But I still think that Norris's pace was very devastating to not keep him as a serious contender. And a lot of people were wondering if McLaren made a mistake by not bringing him in at the safety car on the first instance itself, right? From what I've understood is the safety car literally came out a few seconds after he crossed the pit entry line. At least that's what our analysis on Viaplay said yesterday. But it also, one of the things that I answered on television was a team will never pit preempting a safety car. It's either a safety car or not when you enter the pit lane. You cannot enter the pit lane thinking that a safety car would come out later, because you saw what happened with Magnussen and Sargent. A few seconds later, Magnussen was actually reversing and leaving. Would Sargent have done the same thing? And had he done that, would it have been a safety car or a virtual safety car? So you don't ever preempt one, right? That's a good part about strategy. And the second was Lando's pace on the medium tire was so good that they were just not dropping off. So he said, Lando didn't want to pit actually. So when you consider all of these things, you probably think Lando was just destined to win yesterday, which is why he made the most of his luck, but he had the pace to make the most of that luck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, nobody could out-Trump him that weekend.
I know what you did there.
Yes, I'm glad. People are disappointed on the internet. They should be. About the joke, I mean. I'm not talking about the guests being there. I don't get the outrage. We had Yuvraj Singh at the Miami Grand Prix, which for all of you folks who aren't quite aware is one of the most legendary cricketers out there. Kind of think of him as a Robert Lewandowski of his age, if you follow football, like the most incisive player of his time, who actually scored 6 sixes in 6 balls, which is the equivalent of scoring 6 goals in 6 minutes in a way, if you have to think about it. He was there. And I know we are the country that has the most people on earth. And a lot of people out of those 1.3 billion know Yuvraj. But the biggest sensation on the internet was Donald Trump.
Yeah. I think, we've seen Vladimir Putin attend races before, right?
We have, yeah.
So, if the heads or former heads of states show up, it's no big deal. I don't see an outrage. If Donald Trump is a fan, great. I hope he paid for his ticket, which I'm pretty sure he did, right? But he chose the McLaren garage to visit out of all the garages in the paddock. And McLaren actually put out a statement saying we're actually a non-political organization. We are glad that the former president of the United States chose to visit us. We're happy to have him. He's a great fan of F1. Blah blah blah. But yeah, it's just Yuvraj Singh and then Donald Trump and lots of other celebrities. My goodness, right? There was Ibrahim Ali Khan for all the. Even if you're Indian and you've never heard of him, please, that's fine. His father is an actor who acted as a racing car driver in a movie called Tara Rampam, which I have never seen. I don't intend to see, and I'm pretty sure was a flop.
Come on. It's a good movie. It's a cultural icon. I grew up on that movie. Come on.
Are you trying to say Driven was also then a good movie or Sylvester Stallone?
It was. It was. I mean, didn't you see that scene where they were actually taking off a nickel off the apex of a corner? That was like, yes, that's how you do racing. And they raced Indy cars on the street, which, by the way, I'm not saying that's too far from reality because that's literally what we did yesterday. But, well,
we actually raced in a car park yesterday, right? Such a sophisticated car park. I think pretty fantastic. The Miami Grand Prix was pretty good, I would say. We've had a few really good races. Even though Max has been winning most of it, all of it, will continue to do so. But I'm intrigued by what McLaren can pull out after this. Their confidence would have been boosted even more so, saying that's it. Red Bull is somebody we can catch. We did catch. Can we continue down this trajectory for the rest of 2024?
That we shall see. And how do we end the episode when we're talking about a Lando Norris race win and Ibrahim Ali Khan in the same podcast? We just say, wow. All the Indian fans will know what I'm talking about. If I did a terrible impression, I know I did. Safe is safe. That's what it is. But folks, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Please subscribe to us if in case you haven't. And if in case you do enjoy. But if you didn't enjoy this episode, that's totally all right. Tell us why. And we'd love to make any improvements possible that make sense to make this episode better. But folks, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll be back with more very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Before we ended, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with us on this episode of the podcast.